Hello everybody, my name's Alex and you're watching Retrospective. This is episode 4.
Before I go any further, I will say that if you haven't seen episode 3, it is highly recommended that you do so before continuing, as this video was made as a follow-up to it. There's a link down in the description. Now, let's continue.
While I was finalising the Halo 4 episode, a game popped into my mind that I had missed. A game often not exactly forgotten, but not given a limelight of its own. For whatever reason, this game failed to make the cut between Halo 3 and Halo Reach, despite being a decent entry and in my opinion served as Bungie's prototype for a Halo game in which you weren't winning, resulting in Halo Reach's dark tale. You've guessed it, that game is Halo 3 ODST, a sombre and neo-noir take on the Halo series, released back in 2009. For a series like Halo to take a curve in the direction ODST took it required some careful planning. It would be the first time the series took a dive into a serious depiction of humanity losing the overarching war between humans and the Covenant. Halo Combat Evolved had implied that there were some losses before it began in the opening cutscene, but this was never really shown on screen, and the player was left to make up a story until we received Halo Reach, and that gave the opening line of the first game some weight. The previous games had never truly shown how overwhelmingly powerful the threat to humanity was until ODST came out. It had always placed them as having the upper hand, but not being totally uncontrollable, with the humans having the potential to win some battles. This was also the first time the series took a shift of protagonist too, swapping from the Master Chief to an unnamed ODST soldier known as the Rookie. The sidecast was also changed to a small squad of ODST soldiers as well,
including the charming yet utterly dim-witted Buck, one of my personal favourites from the series.
It's actually a pity that this squad was never reused for another game. They all had character and were all distinctly unique, but aside from Buck having a few lines in Halo Reach and appearing in Halo 5 as a Spartan 4, the rest of the cast have been forgotten. I do know that in one of the books, the Rookie was killed in action, so it is obvious he won't be making a return, but the books don't count in my opinion anyway. ODST starts about halfway through the Halo 2 campaign, with the player witnessing the jump into slipspace that the Covenant supercarrier makes in New Mombasa from a different angle than in Halo 2. This jump causes the mid-drop Marines to fail to reach their objective as they are blown off course by the aftershocks, forcing them apart. This is a key factor in the game. For the most part, the player will control the Rookie, who has been unconscious for a few hours and reawakens in the dead of night, making an attempt to locate his other team members. Throughout some of the levels, the characters will meet up and continue onwards, as is the new goal of the squad, to regroup. This will eventually tie in with the Rookie as well, as he will locate Dare, the squad's newly assigned commander, and the two of them will be found by the remaining squad members, finalising in a big battle and the eventual regrouping of the entire squad. The game's drastic thematic change is immediately obvious upon playing. No longer is the player placed in brightly lit open environments, but instead a dim, almost at times claustrophobic cityscape. It no longer makes the game feel like a triumphant run for the saving of humanity, but a fight for survival in an empty city. The game opens the eyes of the player into the bigger part of the war. While the Master Chief and his allies are off fighting the main force, humanity is still fighting a smaller, but desperate fight against the remaining forces of the Covenant. Walking through the abandoned streets of New Mombasa with police cars, lights still active, and the superintendent, an AI responsible for overseeing the city, is still running background processes, really shows how quickly Earth was swamped and drives home the point that this war is real, with real consequences on those not shown in the main titles. The city is now controlled by a small outshoot force of the Covenant, and the player will encounter small pockets of them within the desolate streets of New Mombasa. I made a passing point in the Halo 4 episode that there's one level where there's nothing to do in a small section, and the same is present here, but because of the theming, lighting and soundtrack, the emptiness works positively in ODST, because the point of this was to make the player feel alone. ODST looks and functions very similarly to Halo 3, and this is due to them both sharing the same engine. This is the first knock on ODST. It's running on outdated hardware, and is reusing many assets from 3 as well. This was mostly due to Bungie's focus on the upcoming Halo Reach, as only a small team was dedicated to ODST, as to leave Microsoft, Bungie needed to create 2 further installments. So this was a quick way to create one, by mostly reusing tech from Halo 3. But that is not to say that ODST doesn't have its own original content as well. It features a return to scoped pistols and a unique addition, the scoped suppressed SMG. It also features slightly improved brutes that don power shields rather than just normal armor like in Halo 3. The most interesting addition would be the engineers. These are harmless floating beings that project extra shields onto the Covenant. These can also give shields to grunts and jackals as well. When killed, their shell will drop to the ground and function as a cluster bomb, damaging anything nearby. The engineers would make a return in Halo Reach the following year. Night vision was also a new feature introduced by ODST. It was an expansion on the torch feature and personally worked better than the torch in a lot of cases, as a great portion of the game was at night. It didn't deplete after a certain time either, which would have become annoying quickly. It also outlines friends and foes in green and red, making them easier to target, and highlighted points of interest in yellow, such as the various audio diaries scattered around New Mombasa, which, if collected, tell a tale about a woman before the events of the game. The game also made a return to health packs, and this makes sense considering the ODSTs aren't super soldiers with power armor on, and will require treatment if hit. In the Halo 4 episode, my friend mentioned the boring defense section of the level Infinity, which again is still boring. ODST suffers from the same problem, although in much bigger quantities. This is another major knock to its overall impression it left on me. A grand portion of the levels feature a defense section, in different styles, whether that be troop to troop or troop to vehicle. Halo 4 in that regard is slightly better, as it has far fewer defense sections, but the defense sections within ODST are a little more interesting. Other than the desolate streets of New Mombasa that I've already mentioned, the game has several more traditional Halo levels that pitch each member of the ODST squad in different areas due to their separation. These events take place in the past from the standpoint of the rookie, who is just following clues to their whereabouts. They feature, as I've said, more traditional Halo level design, open area combat with lots of things happening at once that the player must prioritise. These levels give depth to the areas the rookie will come across. For argument's sake, the player is controlling the rookie throughout the game, and is reliving the events that have happened already, giving context to why the areas the player reaches are already empty. This is largely due to the fact that it would be boring for the player to wander around in almost empty streets just following clues, at least within a gritty FPS context. It gives the player something to think about. I couldn't get away with an ODST review without mentioning the new game mode, Firefight. ODST doesn't feature a Forge mode, but instead features a mode called Firefight. Essentially, it takes the idea of wave-by-wave survival and places players within one of the sections from the levels within the campaign. It's a fairly simple idea: fight waves of enemies that gradually become stronger over time to score points and try and reach a high score.
Each time a new round starts, a skull, a gameplay modifier used throughout the Halo series, will become active. These can seriously change the gameplay as they can buff enemies or make them constantly jump out of the way of danger or throw grenades. It's a nice way of using the skulls to keep the repetitive gameplay from seeming that way. This mode paved the way for Reach's more improved version of Firefight, as it did with most things. It's pretty decent for what it is, and can offer some challenge on harder difficulties. ODST features a new UI, or user interface, that differs slightly from that of previous Halo games. In the previous 3 games, the UI featured a health bar and a minimap, and information on what guns the player was holding, as well as ammo capacity and grenades. ODST keeps some of the features, but with a few alterations to make the ODST troopers feel like they're in their own set of armor, making the game feel more real. For example, gone is the minimap, which is now replaced by a full map that covers the visor of the player, which may be moved about. This is reminiscent of other overworld maps seen in Western RPGs or Metroidvania games. It is important to include this, rather than have a minimap,
as the streets of New Mombasa can at times feel like winding corridors and the player may easily lose their way without this map. Secondly, included at the top of the screen, just above the health bar, is a compass. This addition was made for the same reason as the map, because the streets of New Mombasa can be winding corridors and using waypoint markers like the previous games wouldn't be very effective, as the player would get lost easily. So having a compass with a marker on it allows the player to locate the direction of the objective and make sure they find routes to it with guidance from their HUD marker. A problem I have with the UI for ODST is how it signals that the player is taking damage. Although it fits within the context of the universe, it's one of those things that gets to me, and that is the red screen of damage. When the player is taking too much damage, their screen will turn red to signal that. While it is understandable, as the ODST's armor lacks shields, so there couldn't be a shield gauge followed by a life bar, like in Halo 1. Bungie could have handled it in another way, like using the systems from the other games, one bar that depletes when hit, then death. But using the red screen is, I suppose, effective and recognizable.
It is worth noting the soundtrack for this game. The previous 3 Halo games experimented with choirs and electric guitars, but had a similar feel. But ODST's soundtrack departs from that familiar tone to a slow jazz one, using saxophones for the first time. The soundtrack projects an aura of lonely sadness, rather than mysterious adventure like the previous games did. Normally, I hate slow jazz, but pairing it with the context, it works extremely well whilst playing and speaks volumes about the suffering Earth's people have gone through because of the war. It fits really well with the neo-noir genre the game is trying to push as a theme.
The soundtrack does experiment with electric guitars once again as well. This is most likely because the game is set during Halo 2, and Bungie wanted to tie it up musically as well. And finally, some of the soundtrack uses drums and classical instruments akin to the previous games. There is a distinct lack of choirs though, which is a shame given the legendary theme that they produced for the trilogy.
So then, ODST was in many ways an older brother to Reach, but a less successful one. Reach took a lot of the ideas from ODST and built upon them, and for this reason it could be assumed that Reach wouldn't have been what it is without ODST. It was the first in a manner of all things: new protagonist, new characters, and new features. But because of its lack of a unique online multiplayer, I believe all physical copies came bundled with the Halo 3 DLC packs on a second disc. It failed to stay in the spotlight, as players were always playing Halo 3's DLC maps beforehand, and then Reach came out just a year later, pushing ODST to the shelf. I believe that if ODST had its own dedicated multiplayer, that is to say PvP, it would have made some waves and pushed itself into a more recognisable corner of the Halo series, but unfortunately this is not the case. But when you look at it, ODST is a fine example of neo-noir done right. It's got the scenic flair, a fun, well-written cast of characters that, although they've only got one game, had a lot of personality that took some characters from the main series 2 or more games to build up, and most of all, it's only relying on the Halo 3 engine. It's not a copy with a new skin, like some franchises. It is a fresh perspective, just using outdated engines. It's definitely not required to enjoy the Halo series as a whole, as the events that happen within it don't have any consequence in Halo 3 and don't tie up anything that may have appeared out of nowhere in said title either. But considering the limited time, resources and team, Bungie managed to create a wonderful addition that is certainly better than both the 343 entries. Some of the advancements work negatively, most of the levels having defense sections and some of the levels feeling slightly less polished than they could have been. But the overall ODST experience is a solid entry in the Halo series, much better than those that would follow with the exception of Reach, and for this reason I give Halo 3 ODST a 6 out of 10 and a good rating. It's a game that fell just a little short of greatness for the series. That wraps up today's episode and the Halo franchise. No, I won't be doing Halo Wars 1 or 2 or any of the tablet games. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time. Bye bye. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed episode 4. If you like what you just watched, remember that there's always more to see if you subscribe, and I've got a Facebook page in the description, along with a link to episode 3 on Halo 4, which I referred to in this video.